I find it quite it's fascinating really, because you're trying to work out how to change human behaviour and who you're speaking to, what's in the way, because it's so logical, this case of why wouldn't you? And that's really quite interesting.
Well, I got involved in what I now, looking backwards, realise is advocacy in a big way in 2012. So I was involved with the British squad at the Olympics. So I ran the R&D programme and went 2012. It was all incredibly successful, and it was slightly uncomfortable because we still really weren't used to this whole winning thing. That was something other people did. And I got asked to go on Newsnight to talk a little bit about the Olympics. And while I was there, they kind of strayed onto the rest of cycling and said, yes, but they don't have road tax. Well, that was abolished in 1937. Then the usual tropes were rolled out, and I got really quite irritated. But also, the reaction to it was like, oh, great that somebody's standing up. Because it's logical, it's the most sturdy of soapboxes if you want to talk about health, pollution, congestion, whatever it is. Getting around by bike is just a bloody logical thing to do. And so I just found myself in that role, and the novelty of what I did for a living and the credibility given to me by British Cycling, who enabled me to, talk for them as policy advisor, which I still am, meant that we could go and speak to the Mayor of London, Boris Johnson, or whoever it was at the time, the Department for Transport, and get a meeting and have some influence. So that's kind of where it started, but we very quickly realised that the influence just wasn't quite getting all the way there. There was getting interest, but we couldn't get it over to action. And one of my team at the time, a lady called Kirsty McCaskill-Baxter, who's incredibly feisty and proactive, and she used to work at the Department of Culture, Media and Sport for one Andy Burnham. And she said, we need to, we were talking about creating an example so people could get it. And he'd just been appointed the Mayor of Greater Manchester. He said, he needs a cycling commissioner, and it should be you, and I'm going to ring him up, which he did. So then I spoke to Andy on the phone, and I said, right, well, I'm not doing it. I'm only doing it if it's meaningful. So we need control of the cash, and it's got to be speaking for you. And within less than a second, he said, yep. And then I thought, oh, what have we done now? I've got to do it now. When people talk about exit strategy, I thought we just went in. But what a fascinating opportunity. So I got my own group of people, and we went to Greater Manchester and employed a lot of the stuff that was learned as a cyclist about how, if you almost like the local councils and councillors, they're the athletes, if you like, and they're only going to do it if it's theirs, it belongs to them. So we just said, well, listen, what do you want to do? Well, and they knew all the problems in their area, and we quantified it as 3.75 billion a year to travel in a region as we are now. And that's pretty typical for the country, basically. The costs involved with travelling as we are now, in terms of health, congestion, pollution, incidents, you roll them all together, that's what it costs. And the question nobody ever asks is, what's it cost to do this? Can you afford that? And it just makes people stop and think, well, okay, well, if we change the way we travel, we can impact all of those things, and of course climate change. So that's where we started, and that was quite a long answer to your question.
It's interesting. We did have obviously had a conversation on the way here, and we trying to explain the locality. There was a little bit of how I started talking about it. Goes back to so I've got 3 kids, and the 2 youngest ones were riding on the roads, and generally we've got a pretty, we've got a nice place to live. We've got nice roads. It's not the levels that you see in the UK, but we still have fast-moving vehicles.
You've got to decide who are you talking to. So there's no point in speaking to cyclists because they've already made a choice. So you're preaching to the converted. So you're speaking to the people who don't ride a bike, and it doesn't appeal to them. So what do they like? Well, they just want to look normal, And really, you've won. I mean, your outcome is you've won when you've got normal people in normal clothes doing normal things just without a car. And that's the image you need to portray. And if that is the image that you're putting out there, that's you're speaking the right language for that person. Don't talk about health. Talk about money saved, that you could have a family holiday at the end of the year if you don't drive to work every day. You know, all of these things that, what does your audience value? That's the language you have to talk in. And if your product's good enough, they'll buy it. But ultimately, it's got to be easy. You know, it's got to be shown as the easy option. I think people realise how the vast majority of journeys are less than 2 kilometres. You know, they're walkable in a few minutes, and that could be made to look good now. Or you can trundle on a bike for 10 minutes. You've covered, 3 or 4 Ks. And if that looks appealing, then people will do it.
Having the conversations, I always thought at the start of this that, like we said, you know, let's look at the data, let's look at the evidence, let's present it for me and go, like, you know, maybe we can change something based on that, and it's just not that easy, is it? You know, it's, and that example you give about Greater Manchester, well, and them owning the
evidence is an essential foundation, but nobody buys a house because the foundations, you know, you can't go anywhere without that. You need it. But how people feel will change things massively. You know, if you look at a lot of the stuff that's happened in the world, certainly in the world of politics over the last five years or so, it's frightening what people will do depending on how they feel, and quite exciting as well. I think, and that's the key really. If you want somebody to change, and change is scary for human beings, there's got to be something exciting or an upside for me, and quite immediately. And if you accept that truth, then you can work to those rules. And the nice thing is that the product, if you like, we've got is so great. It's not difficult to sell. And the exciting thing about the Isle of Man is that you haven't done it yet. You haven't completely saturated all your roads and your streets, and you have that opportunity to nudge the course now to actually make it good for people, enable people, not encourage them, enable them to travel without a car if they want, which is ultimately everybody wins.
Yeah, I think that's the conversation, isn't it? It's that move from encouraging to enabling, and it was, you know, but so active travel only appeared in what is our programme for government or policy 5 years ago. So it's a new thing, but I think, you know, you start talking about the health benefits and the climate. I think every political figurehead is not going to.
Well, it's the
deny that.
Even if you hate cycling, it's your least option. you know, of all the stuff you've got to address for climate change and health and pollution, they're all really hard, and this is the least hard one. It doesn't mean it's easy. It isn't. You've got to reallocate some road space, and people don't like change, but it is the least hard and the cheapest thing to do. And I think that's you know, it depending on who the conversation's with, is what are the things that they need to get done or that scare them or motivate them, and you can change the language to suit.
Difficult, isn't it? Because we don't really have party politics here, so there's no sort of figurehead that's with this big vision that he can lead a government on. You know, it's a mix.
Newspapers can lead a lot if you're in that kind of space. You know, what is it that you want, and why is it terrible that's not been done, or why would it be fantastic ifs? And media is incredibly persuasive. Politicians are elected, they're elected by people, and people's opinion therefore really matters. Big businesses, you know, if a big business said, right, I'm going to put showers and secure sheltered parking in for my workforce, I want them to be able to get here without a car because there's a climate change, and I want the government to make that facility available to my workforce, or I'm only even going to come here if that's the case. Wow, that's a massive amount of pressure that you can apply. And I think just doubling back to when we just mentioned bike lanes then, there's a massive assumption, quite understandably, that bike lanes are for cyclists. Bike lanes have got nothing to do with cyclists. Cyclists have already chosen what they are and what they want to do. Bike lanes are for people in cars, because if you can't look out of the window and see something that looks quite pleasant, why would you get out of the car? So bike lanes are for motorists.
Yeah.
You know? And it just changes the conversation really to connect with the people that you need to connect with. What do you need if you're driving a car now, what do you need to get out the car? What would make you get out? So you normally start with it. Would you do it for £1 million? People go, okay. So there is a point when you get out the car. Okay. So what do you actually need to see? Well, it's save space. That's always number one. And when you get to a junction, it's got to protect me all the way across, and it's got to be easy, and it's got to be direct. And so there's a list of things that you need. That if it isn't those, don't waste the money.
People who ride bikes or walk or drive, they all want the same thing. They want it to be convenient, they want it to be easy, they want it to be safe.
So coming back to the emotional bit, that's, if it's not easy, forget it.
Yeah.
You can forget all the laudable stuff and the stats, because they're all, some of it you need, but people are going to do it if it's the easy choice. And if it's not at least as easy as what I'm doing now, then why would I change? And that's, so it has to be easy or forget it. And it helps streamline your choices. And I think people say, I wouldn't walk that far. Well, there's in Manchester, there's a place called the Arndale Centre, and there's the Trafford Centre, massive shopping place, huge car parks. And I actually went on Google Maps and looked at, okay, where's people park, and then how far it is to the main building. And the fact that this building's 800 metres long, and they do 2 floors, and everybody's doing 6-kilometre walks. But they wouldn't call it walking, I'm just going to the shops. But there was something to see, and the retail world had chewed into all the things to make it easy and attractive for you, because that's in my interest. But people will if they see it in their own language. The bit that people don't talk about is discouraging things. But you don't need to, so long as it's written somewhere else that isn't necessarily public facing, of I'm going to make this to make active travel easier, and I'm actually going to reduce a bit of parking, or I'm going to just start nudging the prices up, and I'm going to make that slightly less convenient. I'm going to make this more convenient, and that's how you get, and that you can get change over 10 years. So you haven't got stats for here. We talked about it. The side roads have now got over the last 10 years. 20 billion more miles are being driven around people's houses than there were just 10 years ago, because they got Google and this road's a bit full, so it's going to take me this other way, and we're starting to saturate the streets. And you're not quite there yet. That's your upside. You have an opportunity to stop it. Whereas now we're a very car-centric region. We now have to start taking something away from people. It's a massive fight. So the opportunity in the Isle of Man is to stop that happening in the first place, I think. But the disincentives don't have to be overt, and they don't have to be massive. They can just be tweaked. Big opportunity for all of us is electric vehicle charging. No one's cottoned onto this yet, and this is so exciting. All of the strategy, it's exciting if you're very geeky and kind of a bit narrow and don't get out much. So at the moment, all of the strategies regionally and nationally are saying, right, I need to change you from that type of car to that one. And they haven't linked it to reduction in car use. So you will effectively, within 10 years, control the fuel. And you can choose how much of it is, where it is, what options there are, all the elements around it. So in a regional centre, you can say, well, I'm going to put all the charging over here. And you're moving people very quickly towards electric cars. So that's where everybody's got to go. So you haven't taken anything away. So politically it's golden, because at the moment you haven't taken anything away. So you can choose where you put this new thing that then steers how your streets are used. And then residential, if you've got 2-3 car families, which there's a lot in our region, you can then go, okay, well, I'm going to put charging in for one car, but I'm also going to put a car club within 300 metres of every house, and you can just tap in with your app and use a car to do the big shop or go out with the kids or whatever it is, and then I'm going to put it back and I'm going to have a 1-car family instead. So all of that is possible right now, and that's really exciting. That could all be part of the mix.
No, it's a good conversation, because there is that. I always find it a little bit of a distraction when we talk about, I won't say EVs, because I see possibly electric bikes are part of the solution, but electric vehicles in terms of cars have certainly been a conversation distraction over here. You know,
well, they're really scary because you could equally, if you don't do what we've just been talking about, then you're going to lock it in forever. You know?
I mean, I get that, you know, they're obviously part of the future, aren't they? You know, so
they are, but they're not a panacea. The scary bit is it doesn't require anything of anybody. We just take this car and change it for another car, and I'm doing my bit. And that's the scary thing, that people will feel they've done their bit by not changing anything.
But I like that analogy, or that vision, or not vision, but the idea about carpool and thing, because you know, looking at our stats, you know, they're probably no different to Manchester, but you know, the 90 odd percent of all journeys have got one person in them. Yeah, and yet we're seeing, you know, and just anecdotally around, you know, where I live, it's, you know, there's, you know, families got 4 or 5 people in, there's now 3 or 4 or 5 cars that are in a house that's got a 2-car driveway max, you know, so the streets are changing quite, and then you start to say, well, why aren't people walking more? I mean, it's because it's so unattractive, isn't it? You know, it's so, it's just a little bit, so that opportunity is phenomenal on cars. And I always, when you talk about residential areas, I've always wondered how the Dutch do it, or whatever, because it's you know, you look at some of their residential streets and they just look different to ours, don't they, in terms of how they build.
But they changed obviously a long time ago, and they were heading in exactly the same direction, but they made a conscious choice to prioritise active travel, and then all of their legislation and design followed accordingly. So at the moment, our road regulations, I don't really go here too much because I look at some stuff and you think that's decades of primary legislation, and I'm not going to go there, we haven't got time, but we lock in capacity and efficiency of a road. So if you want to do something that gives somebody an alternative, that's fine, so long as it doesn't change the capacity of the road, or otherwise a highway engineer has got a book that says I can't do that thing. So that's a longer battle, and a lot of this, if you want change and you want it relatively quickly, inside of 10 years, you've got to think, what could we do now? And it comes back to easy and emotions, you know. And people are worried about climate change at the moment, and massively, it's just a constant, ongoing, nagging worry. And people worry about their own kids, and they will change, they will adapt. Not a lot, but they will move from if you give me an alternative, I'll move from a 1-car to a 2-car, a 3-car to a 2 or a 1-car family, if you give me something else to do. And so, you know, the opportunity is there. There's an assumption we'll be pushing water uphill. Not necessarily the case. I think you'll find a lot of people support. Well, they do actually. You know, every survey we ever get says, you know, the vast majority of people want more provision for travelling without a car. But the headlines talking about the influence of media often go for the sensational thing, which is a negative, and so it's assumed that that's the majority. I think the sharing the road thing is a bit of a misnomer, because one party, while a person is driving, and they're all just people moving about, and the sensible people and idiots, regardless of what mode of transport they happen to be using. Just so happens while you're in a car, you can kill somebody very easily. So the onus of responsibility goes on us while we are driving, to take care of those more vulnerable than us. And that hierarchy is the way to go. It's what the rest of the world does. They have a presumed liability that everybody looks after the more vulnerable, and that's that is a civilised use of road space. But it doesn't mean that somebody who's riding a bike or even walking shouldn't behave responsibly and respectfully to other people. Why wouldn't you? You know, a cyclist should stop at a red light. Why wouldn't they? And I think I'm absolutely fine with that. And I would say, prosecute any cyclist who breaks the laws of the road. But if you haven't got enough capacity to prosecute everybody, then start with those that can do the most harm and work backwards. So I think that's the key really. It's proportionality. You know, what gives me best return. So the share the road thing is, you've got to be careful of that one, because it's not an equal relationship. The key to make active travel infrastructure, and I use the word active travel now rather than cycling, because you've got scooters coming, you've got e-bikes, you've got bikes, you've got people on foot, just people not driving. I think the key is it's got to be easy, and it's got to take me where I want to go, and otherwise don't bother. And it makes it very hard, but also it's quite liberating to realise that, well, we could put them this way. Well, don't bother, because no one's going to use it. Don't just, you're wasting your time. We have must be usable and want to be used by a competent 12-year-old. That's our proxy test, because that covers somebody who hasn't ridden since childhood, got kids in tow, is a little bit wobbly. Covers all of the people that are currently driving 1 kilometre journeys. So in my region, that's a third of all journeys, and I bet it's the same here. Driven are less than a kilometre. It's 250 million journeys a year, and all of those people aren't going to stop doing that unless the alternative is easy. So you might have off-road routes and things to use, but you need to be mindful. It's got to be for the convenience of the people travelling, not the convenience of where to put the infrastructure, or don't bother. And the 12-year-old test really stands up as well, either ends of the day, certainly in the winter, so things get into school. But if it's dark and secluded, then I'm not going to use it. I'll take the kids in the car, wasting the money again. So all of those things have to be taken into account, really. Keep it easy where people want to go. In the Greater Manchester City region, when we started, I asked for a meeting of each of the 10 districts that make it up, each of the 10 boroughs, and they chose who was in the room, and they just had to bring a blank map of their region and some coloured pens, and they held the pens. And we said, would you ride a bike outside your house? To all the people there who weren't cyclists, they were just normal people, and there were some activists, but public, councillors, engineers, real mix, they chose. We said, would you ride a bike right outside your house? And we started with people like this. Yeah, just looking for the trick question. Okay, you'd ride a bike. Okay, why? And they described it a little bit, and it's reasonably quiet, just a normal residential street. Okay. Okay, would you ride to the shops? No. Okay, why not? Well, I get to the end of the road, and then they described a busy road, or there's a canal or something in the way. I said, right, okay, what about if we had a crossing or something to get you across that? Would you ride a bike on the other side? Yeah. Okay. Well, show me where'd you go? And then they have a little chat, and they go, well, here's the school, and here's the shops, and here's the workplace. Or well, I'd go that way, actually. That'd be the easiest way. Okay, what do you need? So what's in your way? We'll put a crossing in there. That's quite busy. Okay, so you need a protected path there. Yeah, we could put that in. And over an hour and a half, they built a map of their area. And then you could see a light bulb go, and this happened 10 times, exactly the same. They looked back and went, that's doable, isn't it? And they'd done it. And we never touched a pen. They'd done it. And then we said, can we put it online? Can we put it online as a draft? I don't want to give it to a consultant to fettle into a lovely graphic. Can we just put that online as a draft, all 10 of these together, and just ask the public what they think? And leave it open. You can put comments wherever you want it. And to be fair to them, they said, yeah. And we put it up, and within hours, we had 4,000 comments. And the biggest complaint was, where's ours? There was gaps of people going, there's nothing around my house, and they were allowed to put in, say, I want this. So it was a 1,000 mile plan, and it went to 1,800 miles because of that consultation. So in less than 6 months, we had a blueprint for where we want to go, and we'd shown that there was public support for it, and people owned it because their comments, they could see that their comments had changed this map. And our biggest complaint was, where's ours? And that was an amazing, politically that was such a solid way to start, and it was cheap. It was less than 60,000 quid, and we'd fast because we did it in months. But we had, and it's hard now. Now we're actually having to look at, well, we'll have to take out parking there. It's hard, but people have got a vision of what they're trying to get to. And this little bit outside this house or this shop that's really hard, they can see it's part of a bigger thing, and a bigger thing that they feel proud of. Because look at this is the biggest in the country. And it makes people feel good, and that enables people to do hard stuff. So that's how we got consensus, really. We decided what the destination looked like, or they decided what the destination looked like, and that's what you can do here.
I think it comes back to the common theme is our roads are too narrow, we don't have space for bike lanes. It's not necessarily about building bike lanes, is it? It's about that those weak links within a neighbourhood that's
sometimes
a main
it's
road.
bridges, just getting people across a thing, or you can do it by dropping the speed and enforcing the drop speed.
Yeah.
But get it down to 20 mile an hour zone, which is painfully boring in a car, but it's not intimidating if you're thinking about walking with the kids to school or getting on a bike with them. If the traffic's genuinely doing 20 miles an hour, that's a game changer. So there's different ways you can do it, absolutely. And most areas, and I'll be amazed if it's not the same here, your residential streets, you've got less than 6 cars a minute is kind of like the volume of traffic we use to designate it as quiet. So if you can start to link up those streets and put in a little bit of filtering so people can't use it as a cut through, and you've got a huge amount, so it's 80% of our streets are actually usable, so long as you link them all together without having to do the really hard yard segregated, take out the parking, protected bike lanes. You save those battles up for when you really need to have them, and then tell people about it. Have a wayfinding system that I see this sign, and when I see that colour sign, I trust it and I know it's going to take me somewhere that's going to be a good experience. So that's the other thing, is to flag it, let people know where it is, and don't let that sign go on anything that's not up to that standard. So it's been a fascinating 5 years, but it's mostly been a sociological, psychological experiment. It's not actually been to do with transport at all. Well, first of all, the prioritisation was done by the people who lived there, because that was the most important. It's not what I think or what the propensity to cycle tool says, although it tends to reflect the same thing. It's like, what do you want in your area? Where are your schools? Where do you think are the important places? And let people decide where they want to go. And that, I think, is the most effective way to do it, because anything else is taking the decision away from the people who live there. And the people who live there need to have the choice to do nothing as well. I think that's key. That's genuine choice, and that's why people habitually don't trust consultations. It's because they just think, oh, it's a tick box exercise. So they need to have the choice to do nothing, but they also need to see the consequences of doing nothing. And we found what happened is the competitive nature of it was somebody else is doing all this good stuff and is going to get money for it. So there's the incentive that we will, if you want to do this, we will pay for it. And over here, there's nothing, and people were really quite upset they were being left out, because I want this good stuff as well. And so that worked. I think you've got to trust people to do the right thing. Nobody votes to say, I want a really fast road outside my house. So if everybody else feels the same way, if you give control to those people, you'll end up with somewhere that you want to live. The best question, good questions, are so much more important than the answer, because that ultimately where you'll lead. So if you ask people, what do you want? What do you want? And if it was a bigger car park, you say, okay, well, what would happen if we had a bigger car park? And they'll tell you what would happen. And you go, and then should we build a bigger one? And where do you think we should stop? And let people it's their answer. They've got to own whatever it is. And most people once you engage them and help them ask questions that help them think it through, if your product, and I keep using that term, is good, then you'll end up at the same place. But often you end up with the wrong question or incomplete questions. But I think let people explore, and that's what the pens did really. They let people explore something. And even their own, this is my belief, we need to do this thing. Okay, well, let's do that thing. What happens now? And it's making sure that all of the consequences are visible, and then people will roughly end up in the same place. But if I was the department, I would probably start by asking people what they want. What do they want it to look like? Maybe a multiple choice of, you can have this, this, or this. There's so many components to it. When people are worried, they're worried about change and they're scared of different, and that's the difficult bit to get across that. Trials are the way to go, but meaningful trials at scale and for a meaningful amount of time enables people to let go of what they've got, because I don't have to commit to this forever. So if you were going to pedestrianise the seafront or whatever, whatever it might be, try it. advertise for a trial, not a commitment to do it, because then people are just, if anybody who's resisting, they're resisting a trial, they're resisting just trying different, and that's really hard to do, and it really takes the sting out of the opposition. Say, listen, if you don't like it in 6 months or a year's time, we take it all out. So do you think we should just try it? And that's how New York did it. And that's how New York got loads of bike paths, because they said, listen, we're going to take this out. We know it's parking outside your shop, and if you don't like it in 6 months, we'll take it out. And that got people over the hump. So the power of trials, but meaningful trials, not a tiny thing that won't upset anybody, proper trials, is a great way to get people to try doing something hard.
Yeah, it also gets that conversation going as to why it's necessary to have a trial as well, doesn't it? You know, so that the problem's out in the open, isn't it, in terms of what we're doing. So we're trying to help you with this. So this is one thing we're trying to do.
It takes the fear away. Your traffic volume will, you will fill the roads that you've got. So, if you want to know what the Isle of Man is going to be like in a decade, then go to Greater Manchester, or go to, any highly populated region. Go, okay, well, more cars. And if it's the easiest thing, then that's what I'm going for. The exciting bit that you shouldn't let go of, you haven't done it yet. You've got reasonably high levels of traffic, but you haven't completely saturated the streets. You don't have huge traffic jams. That's just where you're heading, and you can stop it now with less pain and deal with the climate change and health and congestion, pollution in advance, and you can head off those costs that are going to be associated with that. It's really hard to unpick, and I think make sure that it's not all doom and gloom. That's a massive opportunity, but it takes some leadership now to start to change that direction, and enable people to just get around without cars, because that's what it's about. It's not about making more cyclists. Couldn't care less if nobody wore a pair of lycra shorts, but it'd be great if kids could just get to school by bike. And the exciting thing is those clients want to do that as well.